Hello everyone, welcome to the book summary of Moonwalking with Einstein, written by Joshua Foer by Muinuddin Bashar. Moonwalking with Einstein. Though often taken for granted precisely because it is such an integral part of our lives, memory is one of the most essential elements in anyone's survival toolkit for the modern world. Whether you need it to remember your associate's name at a cocktail party or to get a passing grade at your final exam, it is undoubtedly one of your most underrated and most valuable assets. In Moonwalking with Einstein, Joshua Foer, brother of novelist Jonathan Safran Foer and the 2006 USA memory champion, attempts to map out the capacity of the human mind to remember things and sets out to investigate whether it is genetically predefined or teachable and dependent on mnemonic tools and methodical training. To achieve this, Foer's book rummages through historical volumes and mental athletes' manuals, while documenting the author's own personal journey to become the 2006 USA memory champion and sharing his experiences with some of the most common memory tips and tricks. Are you having trouble remembering faces, places, names, and numbers? Or for that matter, anything? Then, Moonwalking with Einstein is the book for you, an exemplary book of participative journalism. Foer's study has everything: the science, the savants, the history, and the hacks. And we have the summary. Part 1. Memorization in the olden days. Have you ever heard of the Iliad and the Odyssey? If not, the only two things you need to know about them to see where we are going is that they are about 3 millennia old, and together they are about 30,000 lines long. Now here's another question. The printing press was invented in 1440. How do you think these two epics reached us? Here's something that may shock you. Many people in the ancient world knew them by heart, each and every line of them, and the epics were orally transmitted from generation and to generation until they were written down. We know it sounds hard to believe. In fact, we won't even blame you if you don't believe us. After all, very few people believed that this is possible until about 8 decades ago. And then two Harvardians named Milman Parry and Albert Lord came upon a seemingly ordinary villager in Yugoslavia. Over many days and many cups of alcohol and coffee, he, Avdo Mezdovic, to their absolute amazement, recited to them two epics the length of the Iliad and the Odyssey, even though he was just an illiterate butcher. Now, how did he manage to have such an outstanding memory, as opposed to you who can't even remember the name of your second cousin? Simply put, since he didn't know how to read, he had to. So he used a couple of great techniques to master the art of memorization. Of course, Avdo didn't actually invent or develop these techniques. In fact, as Joshua Foer reminds us, until the invention of the printing press, almost everybody knew them. Part 2. How, you ask? Well, it was part of everybody's formal and informal education. In a world with few books, writes Foer, memory was sacrosanct. For example, King Cyrus knew the names of all the soldiers in his army, and Cineas, an envoy of King Pyrrhus, supposedly memorized the names of all 900 members of the Roman Senate in a single day. A certain Charmadas was capable of reciting the content of almost any book anyone would ask him to quote, and the Seneca the elder could repeat up to 2,000 names in the order they would be given to him. If that isn't enough, Saint Augustine reports of something Even more amazing, if we are to believe him, one of his friends, a guy going by the name of Simplicius, could recite Virgil by heart backward. That he could recite it forward seems to have been unremarkable, adds Foer in a rather funny, but also thought-provoking parenthesis. Part 2. The 2000-year-old A Bible of all Menomin's ad Herenium. Even though some of the claims laid above can't be taken at the face value, most of them came from a book that says a lot of things which are not true. It is a historically proven fact that for most of history, people spent many years of their lives learning memory techniques. Memory training was considered a centerpiece of classical education in the language arts, writes Foer, on par with grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Students were taught not just what to remember, but how to remember it. In other words, once upon a time, most of the people were capable of reciting Virgil by heart, which is why the remarkable men of the time were one of those who could recite him backward. And we know this is for a fact because of a few pages in the oldest surviving Latin books of Rhetorica ad Herenium, which dates from about a century before the death of the Christ. As suggested by the title, Ad Herenium is actually a textbook of the nature and uses the arts of rhetoric and persuasion. Why does it include a part of memory and memory techniques? Well, because none of the ancient rhetoricians ever read their speeches. They weren't even allowed to. They had to know them by heart. The techniques to achieve this were so widespread that Rome's greatest orator, Cicero, explicitly states in one of his books that he doesn't want to waste ink to describe them in detail because they were just too well known. So, what happened? Part 4. Memorization in the modern world. Everything, the printing press, the modern educational system, the internet. Simply put, we stopped remembering things because something other than us started remembering stuff for us. And then we stopped teaching our kids how to remember things even though we still kept an ostensibly memory-based educational system. Just think all of those times you needed to remember a list of items, countries, laws, authors, methods for your exam. Part 5. How did you try to memorize it? The same way most people would nowadays, you repeated the items over and over again in something scientists call phonological loop, a fancy name for the little voice inside your head. True, these phonological loops helps a bit because of the power of repetition, but the more abstract the fact that needs to be remembered, the more negligible the effect of repeating it is. Even scarier, as you may have probably found out already, you never get better at remembering things if you only do it by way of phonological loops and rote memorization. William James, one of the most famous psychologists of 19th century, learned this the hard way. He memorized the first 158 lines of Victor Hugo's poem, The Stairs, at a rate of one line per 50 seconds. Then he moved to John Milton's Paradise Lost and remembered the entire first book of it. Now he went back to the stair. To his dismay, James found out that instead of getting better, he got worse. This time around, he needed about 57 seconds per line. Joshua Foer knows what James did wrong. He expected to improve by using a technique which can offer only limited improvement. In other words, James hadn't learned how to remember before he started remembering. Learn to remember? Can we do that? Learn some of the most common memory techniques? Of course, we can. Joshua Foer offers himself as evidence. As we wrote above, Moonwalking with Einstein documents Foer's year-long ascents from just a regular guy to a US memory champion under the guidance of some of the best mental athletes this side of the Atlantic. The two most important things he learned on this journey. Number one, almost everybody is capable of remembering an Iliad or an Odyssey. Number two, the techniques to become a memory master of this sort are quite well known and haven't changed for millennia. In fact, most of them can already be found in the Ad Herenium's discussion of memory. The book begins by distinguishing natural and artificial memory, the former one of the capacity related to our genetics, the latter one the skill who can be strengthened by a kind of training and system of discipline. In other words, writes for natural memory is the hardware you are born with. Artificial memory is the software you run on your hardware. And the artificial memory goes on the anonymous author of the Ad Herenium has two basic components: images, the contents of what one wishes to remember, and places, the abodes, where these images are stored. There we just describe the underlying mechanism of the most ancient and most effective memory technique, the method of loci. Loci is Latin for places, known also as memory palace. And this method uses a simple hack to deceive our brain into remembering things it otherwise won't memorize. How? By combining two things our brains remember quite well: vivid images and places. You see, of all our ancestors, only the ones capable of remembering both of them have survived to this way, because there were no maps for an extended period of history, and because poisonous things are usually colorful and vibrant. In other words, all of the people nowadays, through the miracle of evolution, boast or with quite developed spatial memories and can notice to the girl with brightly colored clothes before anybody else. Combine them and you can remember any list you like. The rules are simple. Exaggerate the items into vivid, hyperbolized image and store them as a sequence which correlates to an already remembered route or say a layout of a building. Now you will be able to retrieve the items by walking through the places. The latter will work as a sort of activator of the former. And that's not only the technique you can use to become a better memorizee. Want to remember the number 2209198823 or the word HEDSOHLDR Divide them into dates 22091988 and 23, or punctuate them: head, shoulders, knees, toes, and it will be a lot easier. Adding music to the word sequence will make it almost unforgettable, just like adding familiar emotions or weird images of a particular poem's passage. An old experiment proves it. People are way better at remembering that a person works as a baker than remembering the surname Baker. even though each time is the same word. Why? Because they have contextualized the first one more appropriately in their brain. In other words, baker is an abstract name, and the baker has a white uniform, a white hat, and bakes bread. Which one of these would you remember better? Speaking of the imagination and hardwired brain, have you noticed how there are some things that always attract your attention, like a funny joke or powerful emotions? As long as humans exist, these things will have the most powerful effect on us. That's why it is easier to remember the phone number of the guy with a photoshopped six-pack than say by the name of your second cousin. God, was it? So the next time you try to memorize something, transform it into something funny, sexy, or emotional. You will remember it for a long time. Evolution guarantees that. Final notes from the Moonwalking with Einstein. Described as absolutely phenomenal by Bill Gates, Moonwalking with Einstein is a fascinating book whether you are interested in participatory journalism or how to improve your memory. Joshua Foer writes with scientific rigor and an excellent sense of humor all the way through, so there's something for everyone in this book. Do remember to read it. Thank you everyone for your time to listen the book summary of Moonwalking with Einstein, written by Joshua Foer and summarized by Muinuddin Bashar. Thank you everyone. See you in the next video.